Just a little while ago, Democratic leaders met on Capitol Hill to talk about loan programs for furloughed federal workers and budget negotiations. Here's what they had to say during the 30-minute briefing.
I'll turn it over to you next.
John.
How are you, Peter? Nice to see you.
For the past year, it's been clear to most of the country that the House Republicans were pretty radical and pretty extreme. But in the past 24 hours, this Republican Congress has crossed the line from ideology to really what you would have to call insanity. In response to the public outrage as this wasteful and pointless government shutdown, they want to bring federal employees back to work, but bar them from actually providing taxpayers with services. It's like a new Republican version of welfare, pay people to twiddle their thumbs. After spending 40 hours eyeball to eyeball with the President of the United States, going over the budget almost line by line and issue by issue, they accuse him of insincerity because he will not rubber stamp their Medicare cuts to pay for tax cuts for the privileged few. I think they are forgetting that there are actually 3 branches of government in the American government called for by the Constitution. Yesterday, some of them said they want to impeach the Secretary of the Treasury for trying to prevent a default of the federal government, which has been looming since they refused to raise the debt limit several weeks ago. America's credibility is on the line. Our interest rates for the next 20 years are on the line. Our financial markets dropped when they made the threat yesterday, but Republicans seem to think this is a responsible way to carry on the government of the United States. They say they want to impeach and start hearings on impeaching the Secretary of Treasury because he's trying valiantly, in my view, to prevent a default. Thankfully, there are a lot of people who really do care about all this. We're here with representatives of very compassionate and dedicated banks that are willing to issue no-interest loans to help federal workers pay their bills. We also have folks here from Con Edison, which will extend the due dates on federal workers' electric bills without interest. We hope these generous offers will soon be unnecessary, but there's no way to be sure. Federal employees should not be ping-pongs in the budget process. They should be back at work, not just for their own sake, but most importantly for the sake of the taxpayers who have paid for their services. Right now, the Republicans still want to prevent Medicare claims from being processed, toxic waste from being cleaned up, and small businesses from receiving tens of millions of dollars in loans and assistance that will help grow the economy. We need real cooperation, not more of this wackiness and craziness. The House Republicans should reopen the government with no more threats, no more conditions, no more temper tantrums. Only then can we get back to the real business of the American people, balancing the federal budget in 7 years, realizing the priorities of the American people on Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment, and making this government work for and with the people who are the government and who own everything that we're talking about. I'd like to now call on Tom Daschle.
Thank you, Dick. We're encouraged by the expected development in the House later on this afternoon. This new continuing resolution, as we expect it will be drafted, is a welcome first hint of reason. If it does, in fact, pass the House, I expect it will win quick passage in the Senate today as well. But it's important to point out that this is only a partial solution. A House Republican was quoted in the paper this morning saying that Republicans were giving up their hardline stance only because they finally realized that it was, in his words, quote, self-defeating. In other words, Republicans were being hurt by the shutdown. But a lot of other people are still hurting, even with this new limited spending bill. We're glad Republicans have finally agreed to stop using federal workers as pawns, but they're still holding a lot of hostages, including taxpayers who have paid for services they're still not getting, and contractors who are still providing services for which they are not being paid. So we still have a long way to go. I want to commend the businesses behind me because they're going the extra mile. They're doing things in the spirit of America, in the spirit of volunteerism, in the spirit of generosity and compassion that are called for during these critical times. And I expect that there'll be a lot more like them around the country, given the fact that these brave people are setting an example this morning. Without the no-interest loans that they're offering, a lot of families would be hard-pressed during this shutdown to keep the utilities on and keep the food on the table. But this, too, as they will recognize, is only a partial solution. We're still not funding the Federal Home Administration, Farmers Home Administration loans, or Federal Home Administration loans. The Small Business Administration guaranteed loans are still not going out. And there are no additional funds to states for Medicaid, so states will run out of Medicaid dollars in late January unless something is done. People who work hard for a living shouldn't have to rely on this sort of generosity from their creditors to keep body and soul together. We need to reopen the whole government. Finally, it's important to remember that this shutdown has nothing to do with budget negotiations. It is a premeditated act of political sabotage. The only reason the government is shut down is because Republicans in Congress refuse to do their job and come up with appropriations bills that can pass both houses of Congress and be signed by the President. That is what we need. The sooner it's done, the better.
I'm going to have to leave and go to a House Democratic Caucus meeting, but I'd like to introduce Joe Kennedy of Massachusetts, who will introduce a guest from his part of the country who has done the right thing in this crisis. And then we'll have Charles Schumer of New York following him, who will introduce another guest. And then we'll try to take questions.
Can I just ask you one question before you go?
Sure.
That Gingrich has gotten the Republican caucus to go along with this plan. They'll bring it to the floor. Will the Democrats support this new plan, this to get the government partially back up, the part that it's been shut down?
We will try to get a vote on what we ought to be voting on and what we've been asking to vote on for over a week, and that is a bringing back of the government without conditions. It is absolutely preposterous, although it's slight progress, to bring people back. Last week, we had people paid to stay at home. I guess this next week we'll pay them to do nothing, because in most agencies they'll be going back and unable to do anything, unable to make a long-distance call, unable to get on an airplane to go somewhere to do something, unable to put gas in the tank, to drive the car to the OSHA inspection, unable to make grants of aid through their department per their program because there's no money there to send out the grants. Medicare will not be able to pay their providers because there's no money there to do that. So you have the Medicare employees sitting in the office. I suppose they'll have to bring crossword puzzles with them in order to have something to do all day. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not a sensible solution. But we will reluctantly vote for it because it is better than what we're doing. We've gone from a bad strategy to another, a little less bad strategy. I'd like to call on Joe Kennedy.
Thanks, Dick. I want to thank my Minority Leader Gephardt and Senator Daschle and others for their work in trying to relieve some of the pain that many federal workers have felt as a result of the government shutdown. People like John Hamill, the president of Fleet Bank of Massachusetts, Fred Bowler, the president of Riggs Bank here in Washington, D.C., and Anita Bedelis of the Norwest Bank, and a number of other lending institutions across the country have agreed to provide low-cost, or in these two gentlemen's case, both Fleet and Riggs Bank, zero-interest loans two federal workers who have been furloughed, who have been put in the crosshairs of this negotiation and have essentially been taken out as a result of the hostage-taking that is a part of this unfortunate set of circumstances. Every once in a while, something happens in Washington, D.C. that's out of a movie. This, I think John Hamill and Fred Bowler and others have taken a scene out of Jimmy Stewart's It's a Wonderful Life. We see an institution here that I always thought of you guys as kind of Jimmy Stewart. You know, all the work that I've done on consumer issues on the Banking Committee, I'm sure you've had the same warm feelings towards me. But in any event, I do want to just say how delighted we are that these institutions have reached out in a way, and I think by seeing people like Peter Torkelson and Sue Kelly from the Republican side, a sense that there is a recognition that ordinary people who have nothing to do with this negotiation are beginning to really suffer in this country. And that pain is something that all Americans ought to be concerned about. It is the sense of, I think, civic duty that creates the atmosphere where these institutions are willing to reach out and to help with a home mortgage, to help with a car loan. We have a couple of people, Phil Glover, who's a corrections officer at a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania, who's been working without pay. Phil and his fellow corrections officers got paychecks last month for between $5 and $100, nowhere near enough to pay a home mortgage or to pay a car payment or even to pay for groceries. And I want to thank Kirby Briggs, who's a EPA employee here in Washington. Kirby is the primary breadwinner in his family, which includes a wife and 2 children. He has a mortgage and car payments to make, and in middle-class families across America, they have little cushions to fall back on, and without a paycheck, he can't make those payments. So I think we want to thank Fred and John Hamill, and I want to thank the Bank of Boston as well, Nations Bank, the Chevy Chase Bank, and a number of other institutions that we've talked to across the country who are making loan terms available to the federal employees that are caught in this bind at favorable and reasonable rates. But let's not forget that no matter what actions caring institutions such as Fleet and Riggs make, and Norwest as well, that ultimately nothing can replace the paycheck which is being denied them strictly for political purposes. And I just think that we ought to thank our civic-minded representatives of industry and tell them we appreciate their willingness to step forward at this time, but hope very shortly that we'll be able to get back to the normal workings of government and the normal payments to the federal workers who are needlessly caught in this bind. I guess I'd introduce Chuck Schumer from New York.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you for helping put this together. I want to thank leaders Gephardt and Daschle as well. And welcome, everybody. This is day number 21 of America held hostage by the Gingrich budget crisis. We're here today, however, to talk about a silver lining in this cloud. A handful of companies are rising to the occasion and helping employees who are hurt by the shutdown. While Newt Gingrich and his group are holding the country hostage, banks and utility companies like Con Edison in my area in New York are pitching in to soften the blow to furloughed workers. For hundreds of thousands of Americans, this government shutdown's a crisis situation. And thanks to conscientious companies, some workers won't have to worry about having their heat or electricity cut off. In fact, the last time Con Edison did this was during the Gulf War. That's how critical they view this shutdown, how critical the situation is to the families of furloughed workers. And it's truly during emergencies like this we learn who we can count on when the chips are down, and we are grateful to Con Edison for doing that. Now, on a related subject, last night we learned that the Republican leadership has agreed to bring up a bill to pay federal employees and bring them back to work, but not to fund their agencies. In other words, government workers will be all dressed up with somewhere to go, but nothing to do. The Republicans are going to pay government workers to go to work and then ask them to do nothing. 21 days ago, Newt Gingrich said to federal employees, we'll pay you to stay home and not work. Today he's saying, we'll pay you to come into this office, but you can't actually do anything. At this rate, Newt would be paying workers and letting them actually do their work and their jobs probably by about January 26th. But unfortunately, that's the day this continuing resolution runs out. The American people should demand to know who came up with this idiotic idea. In fact, it's the stupidest thing I've ever seen Congress do. And I've been here, this is my 16th year, I've seen Congress do some pretty dumb things. But listen to this. National parks will be open and the rangers will be paid, but they won't be given gas money. The Environmental Protection Agency will employ all their workers, but they won't be able to restart toxic cleanups. Small Business Administration will be running out, but they won't be giving loans. Well, I have a suggestion. Let's pay Newt Gingrich and then ask him not to do anything. Then we would truly be accomplishing something in this crisis. Now getting back to the Con Ed part, I'd like to just introduce John Mitchell from Con Ed, because they represent 8.3 million. They provide heat and electricity to 8.3 million New Yorkers. It's kind of cold in parts of New York right now, and they've agreed to offer payments to all furloughed federal workers. And for all of us here, Democrat and Republican alike, and what unites us here is not the views that I just stated on this crisis, but rather that we want to thank, whatever our views are on that, the humane actions of the banks and of Con Ed here. So we would like to thank you, Mr. Mitchell, and Con Ed for your help.
Well, thank you very much. And we appreciate the fact that we can help our, let's face it, federal employees are our friends and neighbors. And during this time, Con Edison is just happy that we're able to help our friends and neighbors through this very difficult time. And we just hope that things can be resolved as quickly as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to ask Peter Torkelson and Sue Kelly to say a few words.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Peter Torkelson from Massachusetts, and I'm here to applaud Fleet and the other banks and the other industry leaders who have come forward and said people who have been penalized by this budget impasse through no fault of their own shouldn't bear the brunt, and that's what's been happening. I applaud the fact that they're willing to make no-interest loans. Sue Kelly from upstate New York on January 2nd actually had 5 community banks in upstate New York making a similar pledge. We now have many large regional and national banks doing the same, and I applaud that. Just to point out some of the differences, right now, because of the language the Republican conference discussed this morning will be coming up today, it may not be necessary for these loans. Employees will be paid at a minimum through January 26th, and if President Clinton submits a balanced budget, then there will be a continuing resolution for total funding through January 26th. In addition, individual agencies and programs will also be funded through the entire fiscal year as part of the pay package that's going to come up on the House floor today. It is not a complete solution by any means. In the interest of bipartisanship, I could probably stand here and point out all the reasons the Democrats have been faulted in this process. I really don't want to make this press conference that. This press conference is a chance to say thank you to Fleet, thank you to Riggs, all of the community leaders who have said, here are people in need, let's do something to help them out. They're the ones who get the credit. I hope they're the ones who have the headline in your stories, in the first mention in your stories today. Thank you.
Sue Kelly from New York.
Thank you. I think that it's important that the emphasis on what is happening here shift to exactly what we're all worried about, and that is the moms and the dads, our moms and our dads and our kids. I don't want federal workers out. The Republicans don't want federal workers out without pay. What we're doing here is trying to make sure that the budget gets balanced. What we're doing here is trying to make sure that we've got 7 years with honest figures in the budget. And then we'll sit down and talk. We don't even have an agreement for the Democrats to do that. This turned into a political press conference at the very beginning. And if it has to be political, the direction should be, where are we going with the budget? The direction should be also, how are we going to preserve this nation economically for our children? I had a group of banks standing willing to help, and I'm delighted that Con Ed is willing to help, because that represents a number of the banks, a number of the resources in my region to help my federal workers. But I also think they need to understand what it's going on here. This is for the future. We'll help them in the present, but let's think about the future. And I applaud you, and I applaud Fleet, and I applaud NatWest. Your banks in my region, welcome, and thank you very much for helping all the people. Thank you all for being here.
Can I ask a question of the bankers?
Yeah, I was going to ask them to make a quick comment. John Hamill from Fleet and Fred Bowler from Riggs Bank.
I'm John Hamill, President of Fleet Bank of Massachusetts, and the program that was announced is a program that will apply not just in Massachusetts, but in all of the states in which Fleet does business, which are all the New England states, as well as New York, and with our most recent announcement of the acquisition of NatWest, certainly in the next 6 months, New Jersey will be added to that. So.
Would this apply only to federal workers, or what about the contractors who also are laid off now because they can't work because the federal government's not working?
Right now, our program is only geared towards the federal workers who are furloughed. Does not extend beyond that. Obviously, if the issue is not resolved, we'll look at other people who are affected in order to determine whether or not they would also be included.
A limit on the loan that you would let?
Our loan is, the program that we announced that will, yesterday, which will go into effect Monday, is $5,000 per person for furloughed employees. There will be no interest on the loan whatsoever. The person will have, after they go back to work, 90 days to repay that loan, again with no interest. If, in fact, they want to extend the loan after that 90-day period, they can do so for a 2-year period, and will be able to then have the loan outstanding at what would be a normal interest rate.
Our program is a very similar program. We have no specific program for government contractors, although because we're in the Washington area, this is our community. A lot of our customers are employees of government contractors. And so we're taking each of those on an individual basis and being as accommodating as we possibly can.
Are your terms the same as his?
Yeah, yes, yeah, pretty much.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I got a question to the Congress. Men, women. Could you explain to the...
before we do that, could I just ask, we had a couple of folks, we'll come right back to you, but this is a gentleman from Pennsylvania who is a corrections officer who has been forced to come to work every day for the last 21 days, and I think you got a total, what was your total pay?
I think mine was about $55.
About $55. So maybe we could just hear from what it's like for a fellow who's working and trying to struggle without a paycheck.
Well, we, in the prison work, I'm sorry? Phil Glover from the Correctional Institution in Loretto, Pennsylvania. And I guess we're just thankful that the institutions, the financial institutions are doing this for us. We have to pay the mortgage and get the car payments made and everything else. And we're very fortunate that congressmen such as these got together and helped us get this in this process. And I just want to thank them personally, and I believe the federal workforce would thank them as well if they could be here.
Could you say again, what was the pay you got, what, partial pay?
Most of our, all of the correctional officers in the system received somewhere between $5 and $100, because what they did, when the last continuing resolution ran out, it was December 15th or 16th. Well, that was in the middle of our pay period. So we worked 80 hours, but we only got paid 40, and the deductions, all of our complete deductions were taken out of that 40 hours of pay. So what we ended up with was, you know, if you had a mortgage payment that gets automatically deducted, it went. So a lot of our workers ended up with, you know, anywhere from $4 to $100 in their paychecks. And it really devastated a lot of us when we got them. I mean, we didn't even, everybody was talking about half pay. We thought, well, we could get by, but that's not what occurred. So, you know, we're all in a frenzy, and you know, I can tell you that a lot of us don't make a lot of money. So, you know.
Like just an average
I make about, I can tell you, my pay is between, I bring home about $24,000 a year. You know, I have 2 kids and a wife, and and I have to put food on the table like everybody else. It seems that we've been talked about as these other people out here, us federal workers. We're just other people. You know, we have kids. I mean, you know, we're in the community, we have kids, we need help. And we appreciate what the financial organizations are doing, and we thank them.
And this was true of all the federal correctional workers in the United States?
Yes. 26,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. And Kirby Briggs from the EPA.
I'm Kirby Biggs. I'm a Superfund employee. I was employed up until Tuesday morning when I was furloughed, along with 2,800 of my peers, and 10,000 Superfund contractors who are now not being paid. I think it's important for all of us to get back to work, and we want to work for our pay. So what we really like is an appropriation. My group is, I'm also union steward with the American Federation of Government Employees, and so I've been working on the AFGE hotline during my furlough time in order to continue to be useful. There have been some really terrible stories that have come out of this hotline, one of them particularly being a woman in Kansas who cannot bury her father because her brother has been furloughed and they don't have the money to inter him. There are about three of every 4 calls to our hotline from federal employees have been calling for a nationwide rally and protest to protest this foolishness of us being continuing to be out. There were suggestions like, bring Jimmy Carter in to negotiate.
We're winning this thing.
Oh, sorry. He says we're winning. Let's not do that. But I'm not being paid now, even though I did get a full paycheck. I wasn't suggesting that we do that, by the way. But I won't get a paycheck next time. And my mortgage is quite substantial, $1,400 a month. There are a lot of other bills. I have 2 children. We have to keep them in food. We have to pay for them. We've already skinnied down on Christmas, and we're looking at a long-term problem here if we don't go back to work. I know that my peers are in the same situation, my coworkers, and we just want to. I just want to say to Newt Gingrich that you can't balance the budget on the back of Mother Nature and the federal employees. Let's get EPA back in business here.
Okay, just one other thing. Mr. Mitchell, John Mitchell of Con Ed, just want to explain the terms of what they're doing for their employees.
For the federal employees, anyone that would contact Con Edison, we would evaluate each case on a case-by-case basis. But the bottom line is that we will make our determination on what type of terms that we would offer the furloughed employees on their ability to pay. I also wanted to say one thing here. I want to thank Karen Adler's staff at the General Services Administration in New York, who were the ones that brought it to my attention about the need of the federal employees, and so I just didn't want to leave without plugging her. Thank you.
Thank you.
When you say it's a bill of payment, Mr. Mitchell, are you saying that you're going to go through their bank statements and find out if they've got the money to afford it, then you're not going to cut them any slack?
No, absolutely not. It's their statement. To me, plain and simple.
You just gave me a little boost. Penny didn't like that much, but anyway.
To both the Republicans and Democrat lawmakers, could you explain, without getting into the who's to blame for the impasse, could you explain to Mr. Kirby Biggs and the others why you all have been paid the last couple of weeks while they haven't? Number 2 is, why should they ever trust this Congress again to meet their obligations with them? And what long-term harm do you think this Congress has caused to the federal workforce in terms of morale, productivity, and the fact that many of these people might look for work elsewhere now? So again, 3 questions. Why are you getting paid? Why should they trust you again? And what long-term harm have you guys caused to the federal workforce?
Well, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that federal employees are not getting paid. I think it's the last suggestion that people come to work without and get paid, but they're not allowed to actually use their brains or activities once they get to work is as ridiculous a scheme as I've ever heard of. I don't believe that it's right to stop anybody from working in order to force not a balanced budget, but Newt Gingrich's balanced budget upon this country. I have fought long and hard. I am have been a long-time supporter of a balanced budget amendment in this country. But I don't think that that means that the country has to accept my balanced budget. Nor do I think that we have to accept Newt Gingrich's balanced budget.
I asked 3 questions.
Well, you asked 3 questions. That's a lot of questions for one reporter at one time. Well, I am answering it.
Very good.
That's my answer, is that I think that it is a ridiculous proposition that we are in a process of having a few members of the House of Representatives hold up the entire federal government. You've got Speaker, the Speaker of the House now calling for putting these workers back to work. You've got the Senator Daschle calling for the people to go back to work. You've got the President of the United States calling for the people to go back to work. You've got Senator Dole calling for the people to go back to work. So who's holding them up? Who's holding them up? Why should anybody be denied a paycheck? That is not the real issue. Is a hostage-taking issue. The real issue is the fact that these few Republicans have got it upon themselves that they have somehow gotten the Holy Grail, that they've got the only answer for the future of this country, and that they are going to force upon this nation their particular set of goals and ideals that force a $200 billion tax cut to the wealthiest people in this land in order to achieve their version of a balanced budget. I don't happen to agree with that, and I will fight with everything I have to make sure that that doesn't occur. Now, I think that that means that we're going to have a division. If they want to force, if these folks over here want to come out and then force federal workers to not get a paycheck, that's their decision. But it's an immoral decision. I can't believe that they're a part of it, and I'm sorry to see it happen.
Joe, I'm not taking my salary.
Well, that's fine, but you're the one